these really important issues. And it's a critical part of what we do through Independent Lens, through POV, through series like this, and through Frontline. So I hope you're familiar with those and that they have made a difference to you and to our community. So that was just the live recording of Nevada Week, and again, it'll be on at 8 o'clock. And right now, we are currently streaming live on Facebook Live. We're trying something brand new from our studio facilities. So with that in mind, if you do get up and decide you need a beverage or something to eat or want to speak to somebody during this, please be aware of the wires on the floor and be aware of the cameras that are around. And also, if you could please silent any phones that might be still on high alert. So right now, our panel is going to be making their way over from the other studio, which is just behind us, and they're going to be coming in and they're going to be joining us momentarily, and they're going to share their stories. But before we do that, we do have a couple of speakers lined up for you. And the first one is Iris Pamela Vargas. And Ms. Vargas is a local bilinguist poet, sharing her work to inspire female empowerment. And I actually am hoping that she is right here. So please help me in welcoming Ms. Vargas. Oh. Okay, Facebook Live, hold on with us, and our studio audience, please hold on too. It'll be just a few more moments. I feel like it's pledged, and it's like, okay, Phil. Did anybody have any questions about Nevada Week or about Vegas PBS? If so, I'd be happy to answer those. No. I hope you do have your Vegas PBS source magazines that you picked up on the way in. Inside those magazines, you'll find a survey, and it would be really helpful for us to improve what we're doing through events like today, if you could fill out that survey and drop it off before you do leave the studio today. So please take a moment to do that, and if you need a pen, I'm sure we can find one for you. All right. Apparently, I'm very short. All right. So today we are very honored to have Iris Pamela Vargas with us. And again, she is a bilingual poet sharing her work to inspire female empowerment. So now, without further ado, here is Miss Vargas.
Good morning. How's everyone today? Let's see. I'm going to move this up. So my name is Iris Pamela Vargas. I am a local poet from Guerrero, Mexico. My mother, siblings, and I migrated to the States when I was 13 years old, escaping domestic violence. My life experiences intimately inspire my work. The journey of expressing my life into words has been a very painful one, but also a liberating one. Poetry is liberty. And I share my story with other women so that they know they do not have to live in the shadows of domestic violence. Warrior is a poem I wrote for my mother. It was the efforts of a little girl exhausted from seeing her mother suffer, trying to give her the strength to stand up for herself. I want all women to know that there is a warrior within us. Warrior. Stand up. Gather your integrity from the floor. Dry the tears that wet those tender cheeks. Caress the sadness that rains on your skin. Smile. Do not beg for something that was not yours, for what is yours will arrive. Look into your eyes. That fragile face on your shadow that tells you, you cannot. Woman, touch the depths of your strength. Take your shield and soar. Claim your dreams. Shine again. You are a divine creation like the sun and the horizon, colors that paint the heavens with passion. Pour your soul onto life like a canvas. Do not let the tears soak or damage what is left of your life. Stand up. Stop kissing the ground with the sadness of your pain. Shout, cry if necessary, but gather your soul from the ground. Do not let your wings fall in defeat. Remember that wet feathers cannot fly, but a destroyed soul can heal. Now in Spanish. Guerrera. Levántate. Recoge tu integridad del piso. Seca las lágrimas que mojan esas tiernas mejillas. Acaricia la tristeza que llueve sobre tu piel. Sonríe. No mendigues por algo que no fue tuyo, puesto que lo tuyo llegará. Mírate a los ojos, ese semblante frágil de tu sombra que te dice, no puedes. Mujer, toca las entrañas de tu fortaleza. Toma tu escudo y espada. Clama tus sueños. Vuelve a resplandecer. Eres una creación divina como el sol en el horizonte, colores que pintan los cielos con pasión. Vierte tu alma en la vida como un lienzo. No dejes que las lágrimas empapen o dañen lo que aún falta por vivir. Levántate. Deja de besar el suelo con la tristeza de tu dolor. Grita, llora si es necesario, pero levanta tu alma del piso. No dejes caer tus alas en derrota. Recuerda que plumas mojadas no pueden volar, pero un alma destrozada puede sanar. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us and with the Facebook Live group. It was very moving and very powerful. All right, so before I start crying in front of you all, our next speaker is going to be Alyssa Cortez, and she's a community organizer, a leader, and an LGBTQ plus activist working to empower Nevada's youth. Can we please welcome to the stage Ms. Cortez?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. How's everybody doing today? Thank you so much, Iris, for that beautiful poem and for reciting it in Spanish as well. I find that to be really important, really beautiful, especially for bilingual Nevadans like myself, since there are so many of us. Like I mentioned, my name is Alyssa, or like as was mentioned, my name is Alyssa. I am the Human Rights Campaign organizer of Southern Nevada. We're the largest LGBTQ organization, civil rights organization in the country, and we're fighting for equality across the board. More recently, focusing on the Equality Act for LGBTQ rights on the federal level, and I'm just here today to share how glad and how powerful it is to be among such inspirational women, coming from a family that also immigrated from Mexico and has had a lot of barriers to move past. And I really appreciate Abigail for being such a strong voice for women and highlighting the voices that can be really traumatic and hold a lot of emotional rigor behind them. And because of that, that's all I'd like to share today. But yes, thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Well, I think we feel like we already know you because we've seen you for the past half hour, but now I'd like to introduce Miss Abigail Disney. And Miss Disney has captured the powerful stories from women in her national series, Women, War, and Peace, and we're so pleased that she's created a second series to bring to our audiences now. The second season demonstrates how some of the biggest international stories of recent memory are shaped by women. An all-female cast of directors present 4 never-before-told stories about the women who risked their lives for peace, changing history in the process. And before we get started, I'd like to show you a quick preview of what you can look forward to in the season premiere. Let's take a look.
Survived Mubarak's rule, Scaf's rule, Morsi's government, and now back to a government backed by the army. And the same activists are being arrested and tried. It's not hard to remember what I wanted in the revolution, because what I wanted then is what I want now, freedom. The demands that were chanted sums it all up: bread, freedom, and social justice, including fighting for women's rights specifically.
The British and Irish governments have announced a firm date for the start of all party negotiations on the Northern Ireland peace process.
We've got to do all of the things that we've been doing in our own lives as activists, but now we have to do them on the general political platform.
I'd never been in a political party before in my life. It wasn't politics, it was peace that I wanted.
We had to prove that it wasn't about sitting around a table and just talking about women's issues. It was about basic human rights issues for the whole of Northern Ireland.
পরে যখন আমার নাম এসছে তো আমার হাজবেন্ড একদমই রাজি না।
আসলে শান্তি রক্ষা কথাটা তো ব্যাপক। বাঙালি নারী হিসেবে যে বাংলাদেশের দৃষ্টিভঙ্গি পরিবর্তন করতে পেরেছি, যে আমরা নারীরাও সেবামূলক কাজ করতে পারি।
আমার সবই আমার ভিতরে থাকতে হবে, মার মায়া মমতাও থাকতে হবে, এবং আমি পুলিশ সৈনিক যে আমার সে দৃঢ়তাও থাকতে হবে।
أكثر فترة حسيت حالي فيها حرة بداية الانتفاضة.
هذا الإطار النسوي كان هو للعلن عمل اجتماعي اللي هو الروضات، المشاغل الخياطة، تعليم النساء الدريق، هذا كان اللي للعلن. بس هو في الحقيقة في الباطن هو كان تنظيم بحت.
النضال النسوي جنبا إلى جنب النضال الوطني، الحرية هي حرية واحدة.
So we hope you'll tune in Monday and Tuesday at 9 o'clock each evening to see these really impactful and powerful stories. In your Vegas PBS Source magazines, for those of you here in the studio, you have been given a handout of today's events, which includes a list of programming that Vegas PBS is airing during Women's History Month. And I'd encourage you to visit our website at vegaspbs.org for information on all of those and to screen them. And also for our Facebook Live viewers, you can download a PDF of the Vegas PBS Source magazine on our website. Well, now it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of our town hall event. She's a political science professor and the director of the Women's Research Institute of Nevada at UNLV. And she and her team recently secured a grant dedicated to study gender discrimination, which has since supported the hashtag #MeTooPoliSci workshop. Please welcome to the microphone Ms. Rebecca Gill.
Hi, thank you so much. It is an honor to be here with this incredible group of women. Like Cindy said, my name is Rebecca Gill, and among other things, I have become a somewhat reluctant voice in the Me Too movement. And the story goes something like this. When I was in graduate school, I was propositioned by one of my professors. He was somebody who was very senior in the discipline and had a lot of power beyond even just my own department. And he offered me a position in exchange for carrying on an affair with him. And I was shocked by this, and I said, no, I am not interested. Over the course of the next few months, it became more and more obvious to people who were watching me that something had gone wrong, that I seemed to have lost my confidence and even my own belief that I deserved to be a graduate student and that I had any business pursuing something like a PhD. And so at the time, I did not tell my story publicly because mostly you didn't do that back then. And I'm not talking about ages ago. I mean, this is the early 2000s I'm talking about. I did tell a few people, my mother and some of my close friends, and over time, some colleagues. But I knew that there wasn't a place for my story to be received that wouldn't come with significant consequences to myself, to my career. And then the Me Too movement happens, and this is, this kind of hashtag started by Tarana Burke, and the idea was that so many women had stories about assault, about harassment, about discrimination. And we all sit quietly in the corner and hold these stories. And the stories, as we hold them in, they almost start to deteriorate. They start to lose their truth and meaning just by virtue of being sort of sectioned away. And so I was invited to speak in January of 2018 on a panel about mentoring across genders at a political science conference. And I decided that this was the time where I would tell this story, and I would tell it so that I could communicate to the people in the audience something about what my advisors missed, the signs they missed. Those I did tell, they weren't really equipped to be able to deal with it and to be able to understand the impact it would have on me. So 15 years later, I told that story. And at first, the story just hung in the air. It just stayed out there. And I was alone, and the story was out there sort of floating. But not too long after that, my story started to be joined by other stories. And the fact that my story was out there, it attracted these other stories. And as they came out, the meaning of my story began to change. And the meaning of their stories began to change as we started to be able to see what was happening from multiple different perspectives. It gave nuance to the broader picture. It gave credibility to my own story and to the stories of these other women. And now, together with some of these other women and others in my discipline, we are moving for real change. We are pursuing additional grants to begin to try to find creative ways to get academia to reform itself. And this is with a community of women who largely have been through, similar stories to what I had. And so there is power in sharing and in aggregating our stories. And often these stories are the things that motivate women into these leadership roles. And the stories also help to drive understanding and support for the causes that women are attempting to address. it makes those attempts more powerful, more meaningful, and more complete because the stories themselves become more complete by virtue of being public and attracting additional context, additional stories, additional experiences from other people. And so the story that I've shared with you is much easier for me to tell now than it was back then. And I'm joined here today by a group of amazing women who share their own stories or ethically amplify the stories of other women in order to help drive this kind of change. And by virtue of this, in part of this storytelling, they become powerful leaders right here in our own community. So I'd like to introduce the town hall panelists. So over from the recording we just saw on Nevada Week, we have Abigail Disney, executive producer of Women, War, and Peace 2. We have Eileen Green, who leads the Southern Nevada Human Trafficking Task Force, Erica Castro, organizing manager of Plan Nevada, and Kelly Smith-Dent, director of Scaling Up. And also joining us is Sabrina Bernabe, advocacy services coordinator for Gender Justice Nevada, and Johnette Patty, a UNLV student activist member speaking on missing and murdered Indigenous women. So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Sabrina, we'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to get involved with Gender Justice Nevada and what services you're providing in your work?
So what inspired me to get, I've worked with them for a couple of years now. I've since college, for the last 22 years, worked in social services and within the sex, gender diverse community or the LGBTQI plus community. You know, when I came out, the framework of LGBTQI was very different in the 90s. It wasn't trans inclusive. It wasn't allowing for many gender identities. And back then, you know, we were in just finishing the first wave of feminism, the second wave of feminism, which wasn't very inclusive to folks like me who are gender nonconforming and folks who are trans women and masculine women. And so my work with Gender Justice Now is addressing all of those things on a policy level. We also support gender diverse youth in the school district. We have support groups for parents whose children are navigating through that system. I do advocacy work. I do trainings and workshops for folks who are wanting to know more about our communities and teaching medical providers, teaching educators, law enforcement on how to be inclusive and affirming with us.
Excellent. And in your work, have you witnessed someone sharing their story and having the outcome of that lead to some additional change in some way?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, you know, I very much believe in storytelling. We actually have workshops that we do throughout the year where we train people in the art of storytelling and in effective messaging and taking their story of oppression or being in a marginalized community and using that to empower other people and to educate other people. It's a very, very powerful thing. I think the problem is a lot of folks, people in my community, don't feel supported by the other marginalized communities. We don't find a place within feminist circles. We don't find a place within a lot of these circles, and even up until recently, the first Women's March was not inclusive for us. There are TERFs who are trans exclusionary radical feminists who don't want us in those spaces, although we know that that is our fight as well. So it's about empowering people in our community to know that they do belong in those spaces, but also in talking to the people in those spaces and knowing that when you talk about intersectionality, it's not just, you know, acknowledging that we all share oppressions, but how can we all support each other in those oppressions?
Excellent. Thank you so much. Johnette, missing and murdered Indigenous women, this isn't something that's really being talked about very much right now. Can you tell us a little bit about what is happening?
So missing and murdered Indigenous women movement, it's like, it's recognizing the epidemic of the fact that there is a large and just crazy amount of Indigenous women in America and across North America and South America that are missing and getting murdered at these extreme rates. And it's like in the United States too, these cases are only handled by the FBI, and we don't have any statistics on it. I can't tell you like what the rate is for women here in the United States, how much they get kidnapped. And this is just that movement is trying to get statistics like that out there and trying to get what is known in the Native community as an extreme problem out into the world. And for example, like in Canada, they're a little bit better in getting the statistics. Indigenous women make up 4% of the population, but they also make up 12% of the missing person cases. And just trying to get these women's stories out into the world.
What challenges are you finding in raising awareness on this topic?
Oh, definitely the statistics and the fact that with the FBI there and the tribal government and state government, there's a lot of confusing jurisdiction laws that are happening. Like for example, if a non-native commits a crime against a native woman on tribal land, then the first responders, which would be the tribal police, cannot really do anything. They have to wait, and then there's the confusingness that the jurisdiction gets into, and it's just so confusing that nothing really happens.
Mm-hmm. Are there any solutions you can think of to this problem?
Right now, our Nevada Senator, Catherine Cortez Masto, she actually has a couple bills that she has proposed that would, it's in the, I can't remember the name right now, but they're proposed to make the tribal police, let them be able to arrest and prosecute these people that are coming onto the reservations and committing these crimes, and to make them keep statistics.
Thank you. So events like today are places where conversations can take place and information can be shared among people who might not be aware of these issues. And this is truly invaluable. It's a place, again, where we can tell our stories and share our knowledge in order to drive understanding and support for the things that can make our community better. So now I'd like to open the floor to questions from the audience. This is to be a true town hall format. We'd like to hear from you. Does anybody have any questions for the panelists? I'm sorry. Okay.
Well, Jonna, I'm a person who calls Catherine Cortez Masto and Dina Titus and our governor and whomever is appropriate persons, and I'd like to get further information on those bills that she is writing, so that we could encourage her to really move forward with that, because this is a problem that just breaks my heart. And I know that it's very important. We need to work on this, all of us, make those phone calls.
Thank you. So that's a really important call to action for people to contact their members of the congressional delegation and express support for the work that they're doing on this issue. Good. Thank you. I think we have one over here, and then.
I'm with the National Organization for Women, and we've been trying to learn more about this issue. We have people in Washington, the NOW chapters there, and in Arizona, both very active with this. And I've read that a lot of times the missing or the kidnapped women are being trafficked. Is that a big piece of it?
Yes, there's a huge issue with the trafficking of Indigenous women, and of course since there isn't even a database available for these kidnapped women, we're not able to say which ones are being trafficked either. And I believe that Catherine Cortez Masto is writing a bill, I think, for Native American trafficked women right now. And I'm trying to remember if she's introduced it or not. I think she did last year in July, but right now it's just kind of sitting in the Senate, and hopefully it'll get passed and some important data will be given to us about how many women are trafficked and things that, after that, then we can take the steps to help.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I operate an organization called Elder Help, and we provide information for seniors. And over the past 2 years, I found that there is a lot of senior homeless women. I get 10 calls a day from women that are mostly caught up in being abused by either a spouse or a family member and ends up homeless. And what happens is, if I call one of the shelters, let's say example, Shade Tree, and there's a lady, she's 75 years old, and she's basically afraid to live where she's at. A lot of times, these shelters won't accept them, and so basically, they're left to be out on the street. And I think that a lot more needs to be done to look into the amount of senior women that are really in dire needs of housing and other services.
Good. So this is almost a call to share the stories of senior women who are experiencing homelessness, because these narratives aren't the same as some of the other stories that we hear about women who are experiencing homelessness. So does anybody have a comment?
Yeah, okay. You know, again, I want to say, when we were speaking earlier about having women in leadership positions, and especially in elected office, this has really shifted what they're able to do for us. And I would say domestic violence is one of those things that has really now been on the forefront, and probably since the Me Too movement. And again, Catherine Cortez Masto was really took that and had this roundtable recently of providers. That was one of the issues that came up, was older women who are victims and who need assistance. And she was really great in bringing all these people from the communities who were providers and speaking their mind. And one of the folks who was there was someone from the indigenous communities, and she was listening very close to that and taking notes. And I was there to speak up for the queer communities and saying that, you know, there is same-sex domestic violence, and that gay women are a part of the Me Too movement, but again, we're background noise in that movement as well. And so again, I see this with elected officials being women, giving voice to those stories. And so I'm very grateful for that right now.
Mm-hmm. I would also add that, you know, one of the reasons I aggregate stories is because a story is an anecdote, right? And the lower the power of the group that you're telling the story about, the more easily it gets swept aside as simply an anecdote, which is why your story on its own was one thing, but with all the other stories it became a story of a systemic problem. And so when you talk about Native women and when you talk about elder women, what holds them in common is that there are structural barriers to things like ownership, which is one of the barriers women have, that holds them homeless at the end of their lives because they haven't had actual title to the property they should be able to belong in, and they're being terrorized out of a place they've lived all their lives. Structural problems make it possible for Native women to simply disappear, and structural problems make it possible for nobody to really care enough about that to consider it the emergency that it is. So all of these things lead us back to that there's a 52% of the population, because we are actually more than 50% of the population. And that's because younger infants tend to be male. Male infants tend to die more often than female infants. In adolescence and in your 20s, men are more likely to die from violence or accidents than women are, and men die younger than women in old age. So for all those reasons, we tend to be between 51 and 52% of the population. And that 52% of the population has systematically been denied ownership, been denied respect, been denied sexual autonomy, been denied positions of leadership, and so forth. So all of those are questions that need an ongoing assault by not just this 52%, but the other 48% that claim to love us. And should be caring as much as we do about all of these issues. Because when you have elder women who are, being pushed out of the homes that they've lived in all their lives, or Native women being assaulted, or trans women being marginalized and all of these things, it isn't just some single person's issue. The whole society is suffering because we're not having access to all the leadership, all of the love and personal well-being of families that these women could be offering us. It's tearing society apart.
Thank you. Excellent. Are there any more questions for the panelists? I have a question. Erica, so you are a DACA recipient, and you spoke about your story on the recording earlier of Nevada Week. I'm curious, how quickly after telling your story did you experience the other stories kind of coming out, or this sort of community or camaraderie building around that story?
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, I think I was one of the stories that joined the movement. We've been fighting for the DREAM Act since 2001, and the new DREAM and Promise was introduced recently as well. So for me, it was following the lead of some of the people that had been fighting for comprehensive immigration reform and a DREAM Act. And the reason why I continue to share my story is because now that DACA has been rescinded and it's still kind of hanging on by a thread, there's so many students that are going to be graduating that don't have access to DACA the way that I do. I recently met with about 7 or 8 students from a local high school. All of them are undocumented in the same situation that I was when I was in high school at that age. And we're trying to find resources for them. We're trying to find opportunities for them. And they are out there, they're just very limited and hard to find. So my story was in addition to the many stories that were already out there, and I hope that it continues to add other stories.
Thank you. Good. Any other questions from the audience? We have a few more minutes if you have any questions. Okay, over here and then over here.
I've been working directly or indirectly on these issues since the 1800s. So, on the issues of civil rights in communities of color, how do we bring all of the segments of the population together to join forces with one voice? How do we do that?
Excellent. So good. The question here is about when we're pursuing civil rights in communities of color, how can we all come together with a single voice and work together toward pursuing this cause? Great. Do any of the...
I would add, I think for me, what I would add is that sometimes when we talk about gender issues, we forget to talk about racial issues. And those have to be talked about simultaneously, because as a woman of color, we are impacted by racial issues and the structures that are built around racism. So I think it's really important to make sure that we're talking to white women about the issues that women of color are facing, especially as we're heading into another election. We know that in 2016, the majority of white women actually voted for the current administration. So it's making sure that we're not just uplifting gender issues, and that we're also looking at them through a racial lens.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I agree with all that, like well said. But I also think it's about making the spaces to listen to each other. We have to make a concerted effort to do that. We do mixers, right? And so when we do mixers, we invite all these organizations, but we have to make sure we are inviting everybody to the table and listening. And one of the things that happened recently at a mixer we had many months ago is we had invited a lot of the student diversity groups, and one of them was the Black Lives Matter group. And what was interesting is that we had a lot of folks in the trans community that had been through the Compton cafeteria riots or the Stonewall riots and remember that time when trans women were beaten and arrested arrested and stigmatized. And what was interesting is that these two groups found they shared that historical oppression, and that they were able to talk to each other about that, about police brutality and about the system that held them back. And then once we realize that we share those, then we know we have to support each other in those things. But we have to create the spaces where we can share their stories so that we can have that empathy and kind of figure out where we can go, how we can go forward.
And I would just say, you know, I'm the cisgendered white woman on the panel, and I'm very painfully aware of the ways in which the women's movement through cisgendered white women has often interrupted the ability of women of color to find their way to the centers of our movements, and transgendered women and women who are not cisgendered. So I do believe that there needs to be a period during which women like me quiet down a bit and offer an opportunity for people to talk to us, to tell us where we've gotten it wrong, to not be so fragile that we can't hear the ways in which we've stepped off or done things that have not been productive or constructive in terms of bringing us all together. But a big piece of solidarity, which is what we're looking for, and I think what you're looking for in that question, is going to have to be being willing to not have our moment in the sun, being willing to advance and increase the volume of other people's voices. And that's a big piece of why I make the films I make. It's an opportunity for me to use my power to amplify other people's power. Because I don't think that we'll all benefit until other people advance into visibility.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of what's required is some level of vulnerability in order to create that empathy, and people who have been central in movements to get used to hearing a sound other than their own voices.
And vulnerability is different from fragility.
Oh yes, absolutely.
and what we're experiencing in the media and the mainstream all over this country right now is a ton of fragility. So I've been thinking we need a hashtag not fragile, and I want to wear a button that says not fragile. And you know, it doesn't mean that it's your obligation to educate me, but if you feel like educating me, I really won't fall over and break up into a million pieces if you want to do that. Because I say a lot of things, and some of them are really stupid, you know, and that's true of everybody. So I am happy to have somebody step in and tell me how I might have offended, or, you know, and like, actually, if it becomes possible for cisgendered white mainstream people like myself to be able to hear the criticism, then we might make some progress.
Good, and I think there was another question.
My question is for Kelly.
Thanks.
I'd be interested in hearing some of the specifics of what you do in the therapy with the people with traumatic stress.
Yeah. So at Scaling Up, we specifically use EMDR-based interventions, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's an evidence-based trauma treatment intervention. And the particular protocols that we use are used for recent traumatic events. So I can see somebody within 24 hours of their experience, which is really powerful, so you don't have to wait until you develop PTSD, for example, before you get help. We treat ongoing traumatic stress, so that is anything that's ongoing, so a refugee experience, domestic violence, something that doesn't just happen one time, which, to be honest, a lot of traumatic experiences are ongoing, right? You have an experience and then it compounds and it compounds and it compounds, so it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. We also provide group therapy as well, so we can provide EMDR for hundreds of people at one time. And what I'm seeing as kind of a common theme in these conversations is the way in which trauma impacts our brain is that it oftentimes can silence us. And so when people have the courage to speak out, it's destigmatizing mental health. It's offering the opportunity for more people to get help. And we know that if people have unresolved trauma in their life, they're typically going to pass it on to the next generation in their family. And so when each of us are individually getting the help that we need emotionally, and all of us experience trauma of some kind, usually multiple times throughout our life, some people more than others. So this isn't
an individual issue. This is something that is the human experience, is trauma, and the way in which it impacts us is on a spectrum. And so if we're all getting the individual help that we need, then that's helping the next generation, and it's having a systemic ripple effect on society in a positive way. Did I answer your question? Okay.
So it sounds like stories are also quite important, not only in kind of drawing support to the work that you're doing, but also to actually carry out the work that you're doing. That the ability of people to have a place to share these stories can help them heal, but also to help others.
Yeah, I can't think of a single story that somebody can hear or that somebody can share and that they're alone in that, right? Every single story somebody will hear and say, that's happened to me, or I can identify with that. And if we're not talking about it, then people isolate themselves and they feel alone in their experience, when really we're not alone in our experience. We just need to find the people that we can connect with in our experiences.
Excellent. Are there any other questions? We have just a few moments left. Okay. Yeah.
Mine's a half-baked question because it's still mulling in my head, so forgive me as I try to create this, as I put together some thoughts. It was mentioned that some groups feel marginalized, but I also know there's at least one group that feels attacked by the women's movement. And I'm just wondering if, I see this sometimes coming out of Congress, it's like, don't hate me, hate that person instead. There's an anger, there's I don't know, a fear, I don't know what it is. Is there something that women can sometimes feel that, are they trying to be more like men and say, yes, I can be like you, I can hate too, this is my enemy as well? Or is it something that we as humans feel we need to pick on somebody? I haven't been specific. I'm hoping you can read between the lines, but maybe you can't. But when I see coming out of Congress, basically anti-Semitic comments directed sometimes at women, out of the women's movement, where Jewish women have been excluded, where is that coming from? You talk about the sisterhood and this peace movement, and it seems to marginalize some and attack others. So where is this sisterhood? I'm sometimes confused by the anger that we direct at each other.
You know, anger is the biggest challenge to low power groups managing that. Because low power groups, as we just heard, tend to contain individuals who have experienced a great deal of trauma. And so anger is, in many cases, very just. And a source and well of the energy it takes to change the structures that face them. Sometimes it's misdirected. And very often the women's movement has been tripped up by the anger that it directs at its own. And that has been the story of women's movements from the beginning. I think that the answer to the problem isn't in telling people who are angry not to be angry, because that is a guarantee to fracture a group and to drive that anger underground where it's going to come out in less constructive places. I think that the people who are having anger directed at them, and I have plenty directed at me from lots of people in lots of places, is to not fall apart when someone gets angry at you. That goes back to the fragility question. If you feel like you've had anger unjustly directed at you, okay, that's all right. You'll live, and then you can come back and express yourself, as a grown person and explain why you think this is unjust anger. So I don't think that, for instance, criticizing a woman who's a feminist and also Jewish from the perspective of somebody who feels like the Palestinians are not getting enough of a hearing, we can work that out, as long as we don't just drop everything and leave the minute we hear criticism of the group we identify with. That's what solidarity is about. You know, it's about hanging on to the idea that there may be somebody who might say something that feels threatening to you, but who in every other way it identifies with you. And looking past that anger and finding ways to connect with each other and hold ourselves together. The danger in low power groups is that there is plenty of motivation to divide them up. Because the worst thing in the world for the high power group is for the low power groups to find a way to work together. And that we saw all the way through the civil rights movement and all the way through the history of feminism from before the Civil War. And we need to resist that. We need to resist the centrifugal force that pulls us apart. So we need to just be better than that.
Thank you. Excellent. We have sadly run out of time, but I'd like to thank each of you for being here today. We've covered a wide variety of important issues in a really short amount of time. And it's been great to be a part of this. And so I'm thankful to everybody who's participated and for the organizers for inviting me to be here. So I'd like to bring up the host of Nevada Week, Kip Bortenberger, to say a few closing remarks. And thank you all again very much.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, everybody, for being here. I really appreciate it. When we first developed Nevada Week, the objectives of the show, and they still are the same, but the objectives of the show, what we really wanted to do is provide a forum to cover issues that were emerging in our state that were extremely critical so that our public could get a better understanding of what they were, but also be able to engage more in whatever those issues were, whether it be just through a conversation with your neighbor or getting involved through volunteering, getting involved with your legislation, or just learning more about the topic as it is. The problem is that Nevada Week's only 26 minutes, and our associate producer who's in the room can attest that when she's in my ear and we're doing the show and we're counting down and we only have 3 minutes left, I'm always saying, I wish we had an hour. I wish this conversation could continue. So one of the things we've tried to do is try to build a town hall like we have here today as an extension of what we're trying to do on the show. This is our second time doing it. We hope to do many more of these town hall events. I think they're very critical, and the idea is that we can hone down more on whatever the topic is we covered on the show in more detail, and then give, of course, the public the opportunity to engage even more so in that conversation. So I thank you all very much for being here. I want to thank all of our resource tables as well. We have Nevada Conservation League for Climate Action. We have Nevada Child Seekers. We have Divine Concept of Las Vegas. We have Power On, Project for Nevada, Partnership for Homeless Youth. We have the Refuge for Women, Decarceration Project at Plan Action, Nevada Now, and Southern Nevada Sierra Club, ACLU of Nevada. We have CASA, court-appointed special advocates. Thank you very much. And we also have a human rights campaign. Thank you so much. The panel, thank you very much, Sabrina, Jonette, Aline, Erica, Kelly, and Abigail. We really appreciate your time and all the insight you've given. It's been great. I want to close by talking a little bit more about what PBS does. Nevada Week and Women, War, and Peace will both be available on Passport. Passport is kind of the Netflix of PBS. It gives you the ability to download and also stream any content at your will. These types of events and what we're trying to do on Nevada Week and what we're trying to do with our town hall events and what we're trying to do with our early education programs and our workforce programs and everything that Vegas PBS does locally, the best way to support us is to become a member if you're not already are, and become that Passport member. It's a sustaining level membership. You do get access to Passport, and that is how we are sustaining the programs and the programming that you're seeing right here. So thank you very much. I really appreciate all of you being here. Thank you.